There are a lot of organizations leveraging digital media right now to grow their business. And one that doesn't really get a lot of attention is higher education. There's three really good reasons for this. One, universities are hundreds of years old and they're hidebound to tradition. They're about as responsive, really, to their environment as concrete blocks. Two, universities have a complicated business model in which they receive revenue from a variety of different sources, including state and federal governments, as well as granting agencies. Traditionally, this revenue is awarded through grants and appropriations, which is a B2B model that doesn't really require, and hasn't been seen to require, a lot of marketing. And the third is that there's traditionally been more demand for higher education in the United States than there's been supply. So universities have always been able to count on a ready pool of students to pay tuition. This is no longer the case, though. At least two of those reasons have seen a marked change in the last 20 years. While universities are still old and still unresponsive, the world around them is completely different. Those state and federal appropriations and grants have begun to shrink. But much more importantly, students have become more judicious consumers of higher education than ever before. In 2010, college and university enrollment began to decline, and starting in 2011, college and universities experienced negative growth in enrollment. 2012, as you can see, was a bloodbath. We know that America's higher education system is crucially important to the country. We rely on higher education to produce innovation. Just look at the number of patents issued to American universities. It's increased over the last 30 years at an incredible rate. And we look to higher education to supply our next generation of leaders. What can colleges and universities do to maintain their position in this environment? I'm not sure that the government funding will ever come back. Regaining lost state and federal dollars is an uphill battle that has to be fought in the public sphere with all the scrutiny that entails. That leaves tuition. Institutions have to fight harder than ever before to drive student applications so that they can meet their enrollment quotas. And today's students are different than any students before them. They're wired to a degree that wasn't even fathomable to university admissions officers 20 years ago. It seems clear to me that if they're going to reach today's applicants, you have to reach them through digital media, which is where they're the most receptive. There are some universities that are moving in this direction, but there is one clear leader. You're not going to believe who it is. It's the University of Nebraska. Just look at what they're doing. They've convinced the chancellor, a guy named Harvey Pearl, P-E-R-L, of the university to do a series of spot videos that seem to have no purpose other than to make jokes. They call the site Pearls of Knowledge. And not just any jokes. Most of the jokes are at the chancellor's expense. For instance, here's one about the zombie apocalypse. The joke, obviously, is that this is not a guy who should be talking about zombie apocalypses. So what's going on here? They're humanizing an enormous university system that can seem cold, distant, and uninviting to the potential applicant. It's a brilliant strategy to combat one of higher education's biggest problems, the problem of being perceived as being aloof and snobbish. This is Larry Summers, former president of Harvard University. I know that Harvard isn't the most representative example of an institution of higher education, but Summers is a decent example of the way that people perceive university presidents. Summers has served as the United States Treasury Secretary and a professor of economics in addition to being the president of Harvard, where he embroiled himself in a notorious controversy by suggesting that women might not naturally be inclined toward the sciences in the same way as men. Look at him. This is a guy who only likes jokes when they're at someone else's expense. The University of Nebraska strategy does exactly the opposite. It uses digital marketing to reach its target in a medium that they can appreciate, and the message that they deliver dispels one of the common barriers that people perceive about higher education. They're leaders in the field.